All right, we're ready. Good evening. We're going to be learning tonight Kuf Mem Tes and Kuf Nun Amid Aleph, entering into the last set of tens of the Masechta. Mirz Hashem will be finishing Monday night, and probably be doing something Mirz Hashem here at Makor, some type of masiba outdoors with meat, celebration which is being arranged, and Mirz Hashem everyone will be able to join. And hopefully everyone will be able to join. So we're on the bottom right now of Kuf Mem. What? The meat will be pictured. We'll put up emojis just to show. Yeah. What? Yeah. Oh. Okay, here we go. A new Mishnah, Baruch Hashem, bottom of Daf Kuf Mem Ches Amid Beis. Opens the Mishnah. Mone Adam es orchosav ves parkarosav mipiv. You're allowed to say Baal Peh that how many guests you're having. You can count. I'm having these people and those people. How many kids? You can count them. Baal Peh bepiv in your mouth, literally, but it means Baal Peh. Avalomi naksav. You're not allowed to read off of them. Mapis Adam im banav im bnei beso al hashulchan. You're allowed to do some type of lottery, like who wants the first piece of fried chicken, who wants the first piece of skirt steak. You're allowed to do that with the children of your family. But you can't do it in regards to like larger versus smaller, because it kind of schmecks a little bit of some halachic issues of, as Rashi here says, Dibur HaMaskil, 4 lines from the bottom. It says, Dibur HaMaskil Uvad Shelo Yiskaven Lasos V'chulei Shiu Hamanos Shabbos V'lo Te'achas Gidul V'achas Ktana L'Zakos B'Gdula HaZoche Al Pi HaGoral V'Hamachayev Al Pi HaGoral L'Ktana Yidleno V'Gemar Mefarish Time. We'll see what's going on, but we're afraid of some concern, maybe of gambling. Maybe people are placing their bets. So we'll have to see, and that's something that can play out in halacha in certain ways, but we'll see not so much in this case. Last case of the Mishnah in regards to Kohanim, umatilin chalashin. Chalashin is also a language of a lottery, as we'll see based on psukim in the Gemara, based on psukim quoted in the Gemara. Al hakachim biyom tov, aval lo al hamanos, but not on the portions. So the Kohanim could have these lotteries in regards to which korban they'd be involved in, but not on which cut of the meat they would get. That would not be allowed. And that is the Mishnah. Let's turn to the top of Kuf Mem Tes Amid Aleph and let us plow through. Says the Gemara, my taima. What is our concern? Top Rashi, avalomi naksav. Why is it that we're not allowed to read off of a list? Menus, famously, people talk about this. We should be careful to not read off of menus. Big machlokas rishonim here, discussion in the postgame. There are ways to be mekel, there are ways to be machmir, but not for tonight. It is quoted in Shulchan Aruch. But anyways, the Gemara here is involved in a machlokas. In the Amoraim as to what is going on in this Mishnah. Why are we concerned about reading off of a list of guests and a list of parparosa of foods that you're planning on serving? What's the problem? So says the Gemara, my taima, Rabbi Amar Gzera Shema Yimchok. We're afraid that you may end up erasing. So Rashi says, what's our concern? Top line of Rashi, Shema Yimchok, Min ha'orchem, Sheyira Shelo Hechin Lahem Kol Tzorchem. You were going to invite a few people after shul to bring home. I would ask my wife, can I bring home a few people? And she'll say, sure. And then right before shul, she says, you know what? We don't have enough to serve 15 people. We only have enough to serve 12 people. So figure out the math before you come home. So what might she do? She might erase one family name. That's the concern. Shema Yimchok. It's an amazing concern. Like we would never do such a thing. Like what's the psychology? Every time we have a concern of an Isser D'Oraisa, we can't do the initial action. That would be everything. You can't walk into your door because maybe you might turn on a light switch. Ad heichan. So clearly, Chazal here were concerned, and maybe back in the day, being mochek was a little bit different than it is today. But that's the shita of Rav Bibi. Abayi says no. Gzera Shema Yikra V'Shtari Hediotos. This is a serious Isser D'Rabbanan that comes up a lot. That on Shabbos one has to be careful not to read Shtari Hediotos. These are documents that are weekday-oriented documents. These are big shilas in the postgame. What is defined as this? What are we allowed to read on Shabbos? What are we not allowed to read on Shabbos? This is part of the conversation about looking at bills, which is, of course, going to be a problem. The Shulchan Aruch, I think in Shin Zion, speaks about a shover receipts, looking at the magazines that have all the discounts on them. Like you look in the news, you'll see like Fry's Electronics always has these loss leader products on them. That's all forbidden to read on Shabbos for sure. And maybe the front of the newspaper is permissible. That's possible. That's possible. But Shtar Hedyotos needs some parameters. So my Beinahu, what would be the difference between these two shitas? Why are Rav Bibi and Abaye, why are they arguing? Says the Gemara, Ika Beinahu, Dekasav Akosel Umidle. You wrote something on the wall and it's hanging up very, very high on the wall. When I took I took an organic chemistry class in college that I miserably failed. I averaged a 52. It's a very difficult class. Anyways, the boards there were 3 chalkboards, and he could pull them down and then just throw them up to the ceiling. They'd be 25 feet off the ground. So he could just slide the chalkboard all the way up. So if that's where your luach is, if that's where your menu is of your guests, so says the Gemara, that's enough community. It's hanging all the way up in the sky. You're not that tall. So he's not concerned about erasing it. It's all the way up in the sky. We're concerned about Shtari Hedyotos Chashina. There we have the same concern. Shtari Hedyotos is Shtari Hedyotos if they're 10 feet off the ground or if they're no feet off the ground. It doesn't make a difference. Says the Gemara, a couple of questions. Wait a minute. Why isn't he also concerned about Shtari Hedyotos? Visu, and furthermore, the other Shita who holds about the Shtari Hedyotos, he's not concerned about Shema Yimchok. He should be. Shema Yimchok, Nechu Shema Yikra, he should also be concerned about, Visu, the Shema Yimchok, Lo Chayshinan. How can the person who holds Gzeira of Shtari Hedyotos, how can he not be concerned about Mechika? So says the Gemara, B'hatanya, after all, we have a Brisa. The Brisa writes, Lo Yikra le'or haner, one should not read against a candle. V'amar Rabba says, Afilu gvoa shtei komos. You can't reach that. What are you concerned about? Being matzah the lamp? It's all the way up there. That's crazy high. So ve'afilu gavoa shtei mardos. We had this language earlier, I think in Brachos, where the 2 animals stacked or that type of height. Afilu asara batim zel gabe zel lo yikra. So we see that we should be concerned. Our extension should be much further. Why are we limiting ourselves here? Ella, ikabenahu, you're right. That's not really the difference between Rabbi and Abaye. Let's try attempt number 2. Ella, ikabenahu dekasa bakosel umitse. Really, you wrote it on the wall, but it's very low to the ground. A language that we may be familiar with of tata'a gabar. Tata'a means the lower side. Umitse, that's the same shoresh. According to the one who's concerned, namely Rav Bibi, who is concerned about erasing chashinan, because it's right opposite me, standing on my wall, it's on my fridge. I could reach that, so I'm concerned about erasing. We're the one who's concerned about shtari hedyotos, lo chashinan, because guda b'shtara lo mechla. This is an important svara. We said that something that's written on a wall, I'm not concerned about you accidentally interchanging something that's written on your wall with a document that you get in the mail. Those things are not interchangeable. So there's no reason why we'd have to be concerned that we would read Shtari Hedyotos on a wall, and therefore the concern doesn't apply. The Gzeira, the concern of Shtari Hedyotos doesn't work with a wall because the wall is not similar enough to a piece of paper. Guda b'shtara lo michla. Asks the Gemara, Ulaman de Amar Shema Yikra lechush. Maybe we should say that according to the one who is concerned about Shtari Hedyotos, lechush Shema Yimchok. Why isn't he concerned about Shema Yimchok? Should be. It's very low to the ground. There's no reason in general why he should avoid this answer. The Gemara pivots yet again. Here's really the reason. We're talking about something that's engraved. You have this etched into something in stone in a very hard material where it's you can't erase it. There's no mochek there, and you can already picture the nafkamina. According to the one who says I'm concerned about erasing, lo chayshinan, because it's engraved, no problem at all. Asks the Gemara yet again, why is it that you're not concerned about the Shtari Hedyotos? After all, you're looking at it, it is possibly michlaf with a piece of paper. It's not a wall, it's a freestanding tablet. If you're going to say that something that's etched into a board is something that you don't need to be concerned about, that it's bishtar lo michlaf, that I'll never interchange that thing that's etched in, I'll never interchange that with a shtar, says the Gemara, V'atanya, Mone Adam, Kama mi bifnim, Kama mi bachutz. We're allowed to count how many people are inside and outside. Kama manos asid lahaniach lifneim, and how many meals do I have to put out? Michtav she'al gabe hakosel. That's permissible if it's written on a wall. Aval lo michtav she'al gabe tabla upinkas. But we're not allowed to read off of these little tablets. Hechidami, what is the case of the tablets? It must be that they're etched into stone, because ilema dechsiv michtav, if you're going to say that it's written down, so then who cares if it's written on a wall or written on a document? It would be exactly the same case. Therefore, elalav, it must be dechayik, it must be that they were engraved. In the katani, we see a distinction. Michtav shal gabe akosel was permissible, aval lo michtav shal gabe tablo pinkas. So we see there that we can't get out of this problem, because he should be concerned about Shtari Hedyotos, because we see here in the Gemara that this is a case of chayik, that it's actually engraved. We go back to our first option, which is the nafkamina between Rabbi and Abaye. Really, it is on the wall, and it's all the way hung up in the sky. With the Rabba, your concern that you had about Rabba, that even if it's 50 feet off the ground, we should still be concerned. Well, not everybody agrees to that. The Rabba Tanoihi. We said that if something's hanging all the way up in the ceiling, so then even according to those who want to say that maybe it should be Shema Yimchok and you can't reach it, so we said by the candles, we were very concerned about things high off the ground. So the Gemara says, you're right, but there's a machlokas Tanoim. The Mishnah that Rabba quoted where the animals are stacked one on top of the other or is 10 floors up and we were concerned, that's one sheet on the Tanoim. But our case is not that. Our case is the other shita, which seems to not be concerned about that. The Tanya, Mone Adam es orchosav es parparosav mipiv. A person is allowed to count the guests, is allowed to count the food that they plan to put out. Aval lo minaksav. They're not allowed to read it. Ravacha mater miksav shal gabe akosel, and he is allowed to read it off of a wall. That's a shita of Ravacha. Hey, tell me what's the case? Ilema dechsiv mitata. If the writing is so low to the ground, then lechu shema yimchok. Elalav the kasav umidle. It must be that it's hanging up there, and it must be ushma mina de Rabba Tanai. There's a machlokes in regards to Rabba's shita. Of course, the timing is backwards. Machlokes Tanaim came first, and Rabba came later, and Rabba paskin one way. But the point is that there are Tanaim that function in various ways. So when Rabba brought up our initial concern, we said that the initial chiluk between Rabbi and Abaye was when there's something that was written that was high off the ground, and therefore he said because it's high off the ground, there's no concern of Shema Yimchok because it's too high off the ground. Rabba says even when it's high off the ground, we should be concerned. Yeah, some Tanaim say that. Not all Tanaim agree with that. Rabba paskin, but we don't have to paskin that way in every Mishnah. Shema Mina, that must be the nafkamina between them, and we end up concluding that way that the difference between Rabbi's concern about Shema Yimchok and Abaye's concern about Shema Yikra B'Shtari Hadyotos is the case where something was written on a wall and hung up very high off the ground. And should this be the case, and should we paskin like Rabbi, then it would be permissible to read a menu if you couldn't reach it. That would be the nafkamina. So let's say, for example, you wanted to keep a screen on Shabbos that that you couldn't erase, or it was lofted in the ceiling, whatever the case may be. Then those would be the svaras to be making all those kinds of things. But Maisa, how does this play out in the poskim? There really are a lot of shitas. You need to ask your local Orthodox rabbi. There are those who are semi-comfortable with using menus because it's basically never a concern that someone will write this was only then and it's not now. So there are shitas lakan or lakan. There are other loopholes. As long as you don't say it out loud, some of the poskim write, and you only read it with your eyes, or if you have someone who's not in charge of the kitchen doing the reading. These are all kulas in the poskim. So like if my wife were to write a menu, she could say to me, according to this stream in the poskim, she could say, Phil, can you please just read through the menu for me? Sure, no problem, because I'm not in charge of the kitchen. I have no Yetzirah to erase or add to the menu. That's your world. You just tell me what to do, no problem. But if she were to read it, potentially we have the concern of Shem Yimchok or Shtari Hadyotos, depending on how we paskin. So these are all shilas to be asked. You need to ask your local Orthodox rabbi how we paskin. And this idea of Rabba is actually found, it plays out in another place. V'hani tanoi kehani tanoi. We have another way that Rabba's idea was found in earlier Tanaim to be a machlokas. The Tanya, the Brisa writes, in Ro and B'mar b'Shabbos, you're not allowed to look into a mirror on Shabbos. Reb Meir matir b'mar hakavua b'kosel. So says the Gemara, Ma'ishno hakavua b'kosel. What's the difference? Because when you look in the mirror and you see a stray hair that's growing off of your face in a way that really needs to be trimmed down, and you're embarrassed by it, we're afraid you're going to go get a pair of scissors. So says the Gemara, Ma'ishno hakavua b'kosel. If the mirror is stuck on the wall and you see the long hair on your face, so you're going to turn around, you're going to go get a pair of scissors. Da'adahachi v'hachi midkar, when it's attached to the wall, I'll remember by the time I go, oh, it's Shabbos, I'm going to start walking to get my shaver. I'll remember, no problem. So says the Gemara, kavua nami, adahachi v'hachi midkar, like whether or not it's hung up on the wall, by the time I go anywhere, who cares if it's portable? I'm going to carry it with me to go get the scissors. The scissors are still in the other room. So there's no difference. It says the Gemara, you're right. We're dealing with a metal mirror, namely a metal mirror that has sharp edges. It's not like our mirrors that are beveled or however we have them, they're safe. We live in a very safe, padded type of environment. Everything is safe, So therefore we have a real concern when it's attached to the wall. Uchad Rav Nachman Amar Rabba bar Avuha, the Amar Rav Nachman Amar Rabba bar Avuha, Mipnei Ma Amru Marasha Maseches Asura. Why is it that a mirror which is made out of metal is problematic? Mipnei Sha'adam Asui LaHashir Bonim and Hamidul Dolan. We're concerned that a person is going to cut off one of their hairs. Let's say this were the mirror. Oh, I see. I'll just lean forward and kind of like allow the hair to be torn on the mirror, and that would be halachically problematic. Tanu Rabbanan, 8-9 lines from the bottom. Ksava mahalech tachas atzura. You have writing that's underneath a picture. So I don't know. Let's say you have a picture hanging on your wall, and it says underneath, you got a plaque or whatever. It says who's in the picture, or whatever is there. So the halacha here is stipulated that if you have that writing, you're not allowed to read it. These were drawings or shapes of animals which were halachically problematic. Asr likrosa b'Shabbos, not allowed. And in fact, you're not allowed to look toward these idols. We see when I was in high school, at the end of high school, I went to Poland. And we went to a number of shows. There was a beautiful show in a small little town called Landshut. And if you'd walk in there, extremely ornate, beautiful show. And they had decorations of animals, but only profile shots. So Aaron Bayer, who was my counselor on this program, and the other person who was a counselor was Lori Stender, who is now Rebbitzin Zvi Engel's wife, Rabbi Zvi Engel's wife from Skokie. So she was my madricha. They explained that the reason why they were sideways was because of this concern, that if you make an animal that has a full tsura, so that may be halachically problematic in the camp of Avodah Zarah-esque Pesel type of issues. So therefore, are you allowed to buy dolls? If you are, what if they're porcelain looking? Can you buy dolls that look somewhat like more cartoonish or more caricature-like? So these are shilas in the poskim, and there are people who are very makbid on it from one side, and there are people who are like, relax, it's not Avodah Zarah, you can have a Barbie doll in the house, whatever the case may be. So here too is some shilas in the poskim, and then it says the Gemara, what's the Mari Makom on the pasuk? How do we understand the pasuk? My Talmud, Amar Rav Chanan, Al Tifnu El Midatchem, something that you built, something that came out of your mind. You created this image of an animal that you drew here on the wall, so it's not allowed. So the Shulchan Aruch speaks about whether or not you're allowed to draw your own illustrations of the sun and of the moon. Real shilas in halacha. When we were little kids, we always drew in the top corner of the page. You draw the sun, you draw the rays with these pokey spikes on them. So is that mutter for a kid's drawing? As you get older and more sophisticated, what if it looks much more real? We don't really know what the sun looks like from far. We don't even know how to draw it. So these are all discussions in the poskim. But this does not play out in regards to our things that we have in our homes that may have a plaque on the bottom. Those are permissible to read. This was a different type of circumstance here. And if you take a look at Rashi, just to give us a little bit of context, it's Rashi about 3/4 of the way down. Dibur hamaskel ksav hamahalach tachas atzura v'tachas hadiyuknaos kigon bnei adam hametzirin bikosel chayos mishunos hadiyuknaos shel bnei adam shel maisim. It's like hieroglyphics. Kigon milchemes David v'galis v'kosen tachtea zet suras chaya plonis v'zet diyuknis plonis. These are like these pictograms on the wall. That's more what we're talking about. You have the Karesh family photo, and it says summer 2019. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about things that are much more nuanced and detailed and more of a hieroglyphic nature.
What about paintings that the parsha written out or Tehillim all written out, like the words people go up to it and read the whole thing?
Yeah. I mean, it's certainly mutter. I hope that the people who are writing psukim as a thing are not violating an isser as they write. Al tifnu al ha'elilim, and they're drawing out an elil. I hope that's not what they're doing. L'chora it's mutter. There's some beautiful ornate ones that I've seen people do about the Beis HaMikdash with gold ink on them, and they're not fully 3D, but some of it pops off the page. Really beautiful stuff. L'chora it's mutter. This is like a whole different camp of real, not just writing. They're like painting in the clay. It's like a different genre of art. Those things exist too. You take your kid's feet and you stamp them in clay, and you want to hang it on your wall. That's closer to this topic, but usually
this is the size of the feet underneath.
Exactly. So I'm not even saying that's us. I'm just saying that's more in the camp of what we're talking about here, based on how Rashi defined it. We said in our Mishnah that one's allowed to do lotteries with their children. Mapis adavim banav, and the diuk immediately in the Gemara is 4 lines from the bottom. Kuf mem tes mud aleph. Im banav im bnei beso in v'im acher lo. The inference from our Mishnah, why did you have to specify who it's with? Why didn't you just say everyone at your table? You said your kids. What if you have a guest at your table? He's not included in the lottery. He doesn't get the first piece of skirts. Like, why? Why did you make such a distinction? My taima. The Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel. The Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Bnei Chabura hamakpidin ze al ze over mishumida umishum mishkal, umishum minyan, umishum lovin uporin, b'yom tov. Now, if you have people who are not part of the family, they're going to be bickering quite seriously, and we're afraid that they're going to be super makbid on one another, and we're afraid that in the lottery form, they're going to start violating other isurim. Your piece is bigger. How much does it weigh? Let's put it on a scale. Right? They're going to start getting into other, but family members hopefully are not as combative. I don't know that that's. I don't know. I have twin boys. You've got a couple of those at home too. I don't know. It's not always true. Well, this is a halachic mitzias. Again, the culture is. I wouldn't say nishtana hatzvayim. I'd say times may be different in regards to subcultures of homes. And hopefully, we try in our culture to aim for the healthier family unit. That may not have been a thing back in the day. We're kind of like a new age type of world. Nevertheless, that's the distinction that Rabbi Yehuda says in the name of his Rebbe Shmuel. And that's what we were concerned about. Turning to the top of the next page, and not only that, to the top of Kuf Mem Tes Vesu Chadivrei Beis Hillel, Af Mishum Ribis. We're concerned there as well about ribis that, you're going to be trading a piece. I took this, you're going to get that, and maybe I'll give you a piece that has a couple more grams of basar on it, and then you run into some ribis shilos. These were the concerns about the non-family members. So it says the Gemara, Hachi, Banav Uvnei Veso Nami. No, we don't have to be worried about ribis when it comes to people who live in the family. Really? Ribis doesn't apply to family members? Givaldic. Can't wait to give a loan to someone in my family and earn 15%? That's crazy. Ribis doesn't apply? That's not possible. Says the Gemara, Mutter lehalvos banav uvneveso biribis. K'dei lehat iman ta'am ribis. That's a crazy thing. You're allowed to tell your kids, I'm going to give you a loan, but when you pay me back, it's with a 10% interest. Why is that allowed? So it's a simple answer, but a crucial answer. Let's take a look at Rashi. Rashi, Dibur Hamasri lehat iman ta'am ribis, fourth line. Sheyedu kama kashe. They should know how painful it is to be charged ribis. Alma, kevan demishelohu, since the kids are his kids, and since, as we'll see in a moment, there's somech al shulchano, therefore there's no, because their money is my money. This is an educational exercise. Kids, I'm giving you a loan to go to the store. Here's $100. You and the kids, I give it to the oldest child, go to the pizza shop, have a party, but pay me back $115. They'll be like, but it's not fair. I'll be like, that's the only way you get to go. Why is that mutter? Because it's my money. Their money is my money. Even when they pay me back the extra 15, they don't own anything. If there's somech al shulchani, it's my money. So it says Rashi, Alma kevan dimishalohu ein kan iser ribis. No problem at all. So that's what Rashi says here to explain this concept of Rabbi Yehuda. Amar Rav, it's just interesting that in this one tight sugya, Rabbi Yehuda is quoting from both of his Rabbeim, both from Rav and from Shmuel. And that's why it's mutter lahalvos to banav of neves ribis kedei lahat iman tam ribis. Says the Gemara, ihachi, if there's nothing that could go wrong in regards to ribis within your children's family, then I don't understand. Mana gadola kneged mana k'tana nami. Why did our Mishnah say that when you're doing these lotteries within your family, that it's big pieces versus, that you're not allowed to do big pieces versus small pieces? Says the Gemara, you're right. Your question is good. In Achanami, you're right. The distinction should not apply. Here is now Pshad in our Mishnah. Mafis adam im banav v'im b'nei veso al hashulchan afilu mana gedola keneged mana ktana. You are allowed to do these lotteries with the kids, even bigger pieces or smaller pieces. Our Mishnah is wrong, and that's just not the way it is. Any piece will do. My taima k'd Rabbi Yehuda amar Rav, because he says im banav v'im b'nei veso im acherim lo. My taima k'd Rabbi Yehuda amar Shmuel mana gedola keneged mana ktana af b'chol la'acherim aser. Even during the week, that would be problematic for those who are not family members because of ribis concerns. My taima, the lottery would be problematic during the week. My taima mishum kubia. This language might be familiar with you if you've learned Maseches Sanhedrin, that Masachek Bekubia is pasal le'edus. People who roll dice are pasal le'edus. So there's a whole big shaila in Eretz Yisrael. There's this thing called the mifal hapayis. You give money, and it's basically like a lottery where the money goes to chinuch. Goes to educational systems. So some of the poskim, they're certainly Sephardic poskim. They're really not a big fan of this, and it could possibly for being an aid. So Ashkenazim are typically more lenient. Here too, you need to find out, is gambling allowed? Does it make you pasal eidus? What is gambling? One of the concerns in the poskim of gambling is that you never intended to lose your money. You were always hopeful to win. If someone would have said the conclusion that you're going to lose all of your money, you wouldn't have done it. You went in under the hunch that you weren't going to lose all of your funds. So therefore, when you go in, and you actually lose it, you're stealing from you. So that's a concern here about Maseches Mikubia. It's not just the gambling, is that there might be a Geneva component here as well. We'll get to this more Maseches Sanhedrin in a couple years.
That's person to person though.
What is gambling?
No, I'm saying like the situation.
Which one?
You get deeper when you talk about versus Vegas or versus.
I mean, the house always wins. We know that when we start.
Right, no, but I'm saying like it's not a Geneva that they're stealing from you. If you and I make a bet and I lose, okay, we're taking from each other.
Right.
Win. If you're going there, like there's no.
Right. I mean, Ashkenazim for sure don't typically assume that your average, pulling of the slots makes you puzzle edus. We don't typically assume that, but there are scenarios that we could get into that would be difficult for Ashkenazim. But by and large, Sephardim are way more makbid about these things. The Rambam and Rabbi Yosef also had a lot of as some chuvas on this, like not kishmak chuvas. That's it. I don't know. I'm not holding in the sugyo. We'll dig into it when we get to Maseches Sanhedrin. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Maybe no one should be an aide when they come back from Vegas, just by definition. Yeah. This is being recorded, Avi. Okay, let's go. We are a quarter of the way down. Matilim Chalashin. We said in our Mishnah that there's also some lotteries that take place for Kohanim in regards to not manos, but to korbanos, in regards to the sacrifices themselves, who can do which hakrava, but not the cuts of meat that you get. You want the shoulder, you want all the fancy cuts. I don't even know what they are, but let's see what they are. It says the Gemara, what did our Mishnah mean? My avalo al hamanos. What does it mean that they can't have these lotteries in regards to the cuts of the meat? Amar Rav Yaakov, Berei Debas Yaakov. Apparently, he was referenced by his mother, which means that his father was not kishmak. Aval lo al hamanos shelchol. When it's shelchol b'yom tov, when it's yontif, you can't handle with the other kohanim about the meat that they could have taken care of before yontif, because you're not allowed to do the work. You should have been done it before yontif. You should not be doing it now. Could have been done before yontif, so therefore it's not allowed. It's Gemara pshita. Answers the Gemara, no. Mahu detema hoel uksiv imchat kimrive kohen. The kohanim were afraid that they're going to fight, and this is a better option than that. Says the Gemara. I might have thought it's permissible to go retroactively look back at the korbanos from pre-Yom Tov and then to barter with them and to handle with them on Yantiv Kamash Malan, but that's not the case. Says the Gemara, and I got it. Of Yaakov, Berei Debas Yaakov, the same person who we just mentioned earlier. Kol shechavero ne'enash al yado ein machnisin asob b'mechitzaso shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. A very strong Gemara. Anyone who gets punished because of me, so then I'm not welcome in the mechitza of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We should not be davening, bin polei vecha al tismach. We should not be happy with the downfall of our enemies or our friends. We certainly should not be davening for them to have a bad experience. The key language here is chavero. There are people who are rishayim, that's for sure. There are people who do not fall in the category of v'ahavta l'reacha. A reya has pshat, that's a real thing. A reya has scope. It's not this lovey-dovey, everybody. No, not everybody's included in a reya. You have to be of a quality person. If you're mamish a rasha, then this din doesn't apply. But this is what the Gemara says, is that a person who is that's correct. A malshin, those are serious crimes. But malshin to who? We have to figure out what the context is. Anyone who speaks lashon hara, is that what we're talking about? Is someone who's malshin like a moser? Like we have to look. But malshin wasn't even really the initial word according to the Yemenite traditions of what the pasuk what the paragraph actually said. Could be. We would have to spend time defining what's in the category of yes, you're a chaver, and no, you're not a chaver as it relates to this language here. But this person who, where one of your friends gets punished on your accord, you are not welcome in the mechitza of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So says the Gemara Minolan. Where do we know this from? Answers the Gemara. Where do we know this from? The Gemara says from a pasuk. In regards to the story about Achav, Yomer Hashem was speaking to some lofty beings up in the heavens. Mi yifta es Achav. Who would like to sway the heart of Achav? By Ya'al, and then he will go up. He'll go up to this place, and he'll end up getting killed there. By Yomer Zebecho, Amar Becho. Everyone wanted to do it. But Yatsa Haruach, one spirit came forward. By Ya'amo Lifnei Hashem, and he stood before Hashem and said, "By Yomer Ani Afatenu v'Gomer." I'm the one who's going to convince him. How am I going to do it? By Yomer Eitzei, he said, "I'm going to go out." Va'yisi Ruach Sheker b'fi kol neviyav. I'm going to whisper lies into the ears of all of the people who guide him. By Yomer Tifte v'Gam Tuchal. he said, "You're going to." He's going to be swayed, and then he'll end up being killed. And then Hakadosh Baruch Hu seems to say back, "Say va'asei kain, go out, go away from me, and then you can do it." The Amrina and my ruach. What does this mean? Who was the ruach? Amar Rav Yochanan, zerucho shel Nevos. Nevos was a person that Achav killed. Who might say toward the end of the pasuk it said, "Say va'asei kain." Say Amar Rav, say mi mechitzasi. Get out. This you can't do. This is the pasuk that indicates that he killed you. Sounds like a Russia to me. I don't know, but seemingly the ruach of Nevos, who was killed by Achav, was still in the category of not able to create punishment for Achav, and that's what it says. And that's a Mari Makom. Says Gemara, that's not true because that Mari Makom the Dilma Hasam Hainu Taima Dichsiv, because the pasuk there writes that he lied. Dichsiv Dover Shkarim lo Yiko. No, maybe there's because he lied. Maybe that's why he's not welcomed in Mechitzasi. And it's not because he caused for onesh. Elamehacha, maybe it's coming from a different source. It says the pasuk, Savata kalon mikavod shesei, gamata behe arel. You are basically, you have more shame than you have kavod, and you drink as well as those who are arelin. What's the pshat in the pasuk? Savata kalon mikavod zenebuchadnezzar. The person, and we're going to learn a lot about Nebuchadnezzar tonight, maybe even more of a Russia than we're used to hearing about, and we'll see soon why that's the case. He has more shame than he has kavod, and the rest of the pasuk shesei gamata behe arel zet tzidkiya, and the person who's going to drink with the arel. This is a reference to tzidkiyahu. This is a very strange Gemara because he was a tzaddik. The Gemara is going to reject this. First of all, Chada says the Gemara, de kule krab Nebuchadnezzar. No, first of all, you can't say any of the pasuk is talking about tzidkiya because the whole pasuk is talking about Nebuchadnezzar. But tzidkiya tzadika, he was a righteous person. Why would you say that he is that he's included in this pasuk? It says the Gemara, my havale lemevadle. There was nothing to prevent Nebuchadnezzar from doing the terrible things he wanted to do, which was, we will see, to be inappropriate with him. We'll see that on the next page. The Amar of Yehuda, Amar Rav, Bishah shebikesh osa rasha lasos osa tadekach. When he wanted to do that which was inappropriate with tzidkiyo, he didn't have a choice. It says the Gemara, therefore that can't be the pasuk ella mehacha. Rather, it must be from another pasuk. What does the pasuk say? Gam anosh la tzadik lo tov. That a punishment for a tzaddik is not good. Ein lo tov ela ra. Lo tov is equivalent to ra, and that connects us to the next pasuk. Uchsiv ki lo el chafetz resha ata lo yigur chara. And how do we give pshat in the pasuk? Tzadik ata Hashem v'lo yagur bim gor chara. This evil person can't live with you. How did we start out? We tried to learn out this idea that a person who causes harm to other people will not be welcome in the mechitza of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and this is that. So this is our Mari Makom that we conclude with. We go back to our Mishnah a little bit to try to find out. We used a very weird language in our Mishnah of chulshin as a language of like a lottery for the Kohanim. So says the Gemara, "My mashma dehai chalashin lishna de purahu." How do we know that the word chalashin has something to do with a lottery? Says the Gemara, Dichsiv, the pasuk says, "Ech nafalti mishamayim heilel ben shachar nigdat al aretz cholesh al goyim." Looking at the end of the pasuk. Nigdat al-arts, he cut down the land. Cholesh al-goyim, he had lots going over the land. What was going on here? And this is where we gain some insight into the real rishus of Nebuchadnezzar. Amar Rabba bar Rav Huna melamed shahaya matil pur al gedolei malchus. Nebuchadnezzar used to have a lottery about who he would violate Mishkav Zachar with on a daily basis. Leida eze ben yomo shel Mishkav Zachar. So that was that was one aspect of his rishus, and he was so powerful that nobody had a choice. It was just what it was, and this was a demand of his malchus. So that was quite a wicked person, and connected as well. Let's continue. That this pasuk in its context, it says that everyone was actually excited after he died. Of course, Amar Rav Yochanan shenachu mi mishkav. That basically all of this had stopped at that point. No one was happy, obviously, during that tkufa of time. Everyone was finally joyous. You cannot be anywhere near his house. Us'irim yirkedu sham. Se'irim is a reference to negative spirits, to evil spirits, and they were all dancing there. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Rabbi Shashibikesh Osa Rasha Lasos La'oso Tzadik, when he wanted to be with Tzidkiyahu, Nimshecha or Lasso Shlosh Meos Ama. Obviously, a mashal. The question is, what does it mean? But it means that his orla grew to 300 amos, and it was physically inhibiting what was going on in the room. Shene'emar savata kalon mikavod. There is more busha for you than there is kavod. Shesei gamata vehe arel. And the pasuk here learns that arel begematria shlosh meos have. It's 300, and this was his onesh of trying to violate someone who was otherwise a tzaddik. Also Rasha Gehenim. When Nebuchadnezzar went down to Gehenim, Rashu kol Yardei Gehenim, everyone down there is like, oh no, how is this going to play out? Nebuchadnezzar is in Gehenim. Amru Shema Limshol Alehem Huba O Lechalos Kemosam Huba. They didn't know if he was going to be joining them to rule over them like he did here on earth, or Lechalos to become weak like them, as was prevalent in Gehenim. Shne'emar. The heavenly voice comes out and says, Mimina Amta, are you so great? You can go very low into that dark place, Ashkiva. You can rest with the Arelim, those who are uncircumcised. Next pasuk that speaks about the country of Bavel. Let me just read this pasuk properly. What does the pasuk say? Eich Shavas Nogesh Shavasa Madheva. The country of Bavel, that they were stopped with Madheva. What does that mean? Amar Yehuda Marav Shavsa Umazu. This was they stopped. She'amra, they said, Medod vehave, measure out your coins and give us your money. Vikadamre, another way. Vikadamre she'amra meod meod hevi below mida. In fact, the opposite is that you should not even measure it. Just different approaches as to what the pasuk of Madheva means when it speaks about gold. Another pasuk about Nebuchadnezzar, and then we will get to the next Mishnah Baruch Hashem. The pasuk says, Ruvu Yatira Hosaft Li, and there was extra greatness given to me, he says. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav Yirmiyah Bar Abba, Melamed Sherachav al Ari Zachar. Nebuchadnezzar would ride on a lion, the Kashar Tanin Birosho, and he tied a snake on his head. Machlokas here, whose head is he talking about? Is on the head of the animal to show his bilas, or was it like an ornate type of animal hat that he was wearing on his own head? The Kaim Mashanemar, like the pasuk says, Games Chayas Hasada Nasati Lo Le'avdo, that he said that even Nebuchadnezzar will have these animals which would then serve him. And that brings us to the next Mishnah, which speaks a little bit more about Hilchos Shabbos topics and not so much about these strange agalities. Says the Gemara, Lo Yiskor Adam Po'alim B'Shabbos, you're not allowed to hire people on Shabbos. V'lo Yomar Adam L'Chaveiro Liskor Lo Po'alim. I can't hire someone, and I can't ask you to hire someone. That would not be right. Ein Machashichen Ala Tchum Liskor Lo Po'alim. Let's say you have your 2,000 Amma Tchum Shabbos. We know that there's a Tchum Shabbos that once you leave the city limits, the halacha is Machlokas if it's Nisr Dorais or Nisr Dorabanan in the Rishonim. But once you hit that threshold, if you cross that 2,000 Amma line from the outskirts of your city, that's where the laws of Shabbos kick in and say you're not allowed. Let's say you walk that length just so that you can get to another location outside the 2,000 amos. Well, it has to be 4,000 amos because 2,000 has to be 2,000 from any one city, whatever the case may be, to go hire a po'alim. So that's what the Mishnah here says. You can't go all the way out there before Shabbos is out to go hire someone once Shabbos is over. Ulahavi peiros, and bring back fruits, you're not allowed. Aval machshechu lishmor, you're allowed to go to the end of the tchum, lishmor, to go look at your fruit that you have in a field out there, or maybe peros biyado, and then after Shabbos, you're allowed to bring home the fruits because you went there for a reason that's permissible on Shabbos. Klal Amar Abba Shaul Kol She'ani Zakai B'Amiraso Rishoy Ani Lahachshich Alav. We will be spending more time on this, not today but tomorrow, about this idea of the klal of Rabbi Abba, that anything that I'm allowed to get done in one way or another, seemingly with Amir La'akum, those are things that I can be machshech alav. I can go to the end of the tchum for those kinds of things. So says the Gemara, a very strange Mishnah we have. It says that I'm not allowed to hire someone and I can't ask you to hire someone. Thank you. We know that we're not allowed to do that on Shabbos. Says the Gemara, Maishnahu u'maishna chaveiro. They're both aser. Amar Rav Papa chaver nachri. The chaver we're talking about is not Jewish. Now, we have learned, what have we learned? 210 blot in Shas so far. Never has a chaver been a reference to a guy, not one time. So it's a very strange language in general, but that's not even what bothered the Gemara. What bothers the Gemara is that that's usher too. He's a guy. Maskif lo Rav Ashi amira lenachri shvus. This Mari Makom is a very difficult shita for the one or two Rishonim, the small class of Rishonim who hold that Amir La'akum is an Isser Doraisa. How do they explain away this Gemara, which is black on white, to say that Amir La'akum is an Isser Dorabanan? Either way, we reject Rav Papa's answer that the Chaver of our Mishnah is a Nachri. Ala Amar Rav Ashi, Afidutema Chaver Yisrael, HaKamash Malan. There was something to be learned from this unique phraseology in our Mishnah. Of course, you cannot ask your friend to hire someone for you. Aval, what you can do is Omer Adam lechaveru hanira shetamodi mila erev. You think we'll be able to hang out later tonight? And it can be like a little bit of a remez that you'll come over, you'll break, like it may be like unspoken language, that's permissible. As long as it's not said explicitly, then that would be considered permissible. Umas nisan money. Who is that shita like? Says the Gemara, Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha. Where do we see this? Tanya, the Brisa writes, Lo Yomar Adam lechaveru hanira shetamodi mila erev. According to the Tanakama in this Brisa, you're not allowed to do what we just said. You're not allowed to say this veiled language of someone. You'll come over, implying that maybe you'll be able to come over later, and I can hire you. Whatever the remez was, the Tanakama doesn't allow it. But Yeshua ben Korcha Omer Adam lechaveru hanira shetamodi mila erev. That is permissible. So that's the Mari Makom that supports this idea, which seems to be emanating from our Mishnah, because according to Rav Ashi's answer, the whole reason why we had the strange language in our Mishnah of I'm not allowed to ask my friend was not about that din, but the next step of the din, which is that I can kind of hint to him to come over after Shabbos and to hire him. So that's all based on Rav Yeshua ben Korcha. So seemingly our Mishnah is in line with him. Amar Rabbi Bar Chana, Amar Rav Yochanan, Halacha Rav Yeshua ben Korcha. The Amar Rabbi Bar Chana, Amar Rav Yochanan, my time is Rav Yeshua ben Korcha. What's the reason why it's allowed? Because Tichsiv Mimtzo Chef Sochavet Aber Davar. This is a famous pasuk which has a lot of different applications in Hilchos Shabbos. Dibur asor, hirhor mutter. If you leave the real subtleties in your brain, that's mutter. To say it explicitly is what the problem is. Rami le Rav Acha bar Rav Huna le Rava. The question was raised. Mi Amar Rav Yochanan, Dibur asor, hirhor mutter. Does Rav Yochanan really hold of the opinion that Dibur, the explicit phraseology, is forbidden, but the hinted thinking phraseology is mutter, alma? And if that's true, then what then does Rav Yochanan hold? Hirhur lav kedibur dami. Would we then say that hirhur is in fact separate? Would we say that those two things are separate? I don't think that we would do that, says the Gemara. Amar Rabba Bar Chana, Amar Rav Yochanan, he says himself, B'chol makom mutter leharher. You're allowed to have hirhurim everywhere about divrei Torah. You can think about it wherever you want. Chus mi beis hamerchatz. You're allowed to have these thoughts anywhere you want. You're just not allowed to have it there. And that seems to appear that hirhur is treated the same as dibur in a beis hakisei. Says the Gemara, shiny hatzam, that case is different because the ba'inan v'haya machanecha kadosh, we need, when you are in those holy places, the din of v'haya machanecha kadosh v'leka. And there, in those circumstances where we have a din of tznius, v'haya machanecha kadosh, there we may say that they have the same din. But in general, we would assume, like Rav Yochanan would have said earlier, that hirhur is not like dibur. Says the Gemara, hachanami ksiv v'lo yireh b'cha ervas davar. The pasuk itself of V'haya machanecha kadosh ends with that, and it speaks about davar. Seemingly, hirhur and davar are in the same exact pasuk. Says the Gemara, ahumi baile, that extra language of the pasuk toward the end of the pasuk of v'lo yireh b'cha ervas davar, ahumi baile lechad Rav Yehuda, Damar Rav Yehuda. Oved Kochavim Arum Asr Likros Kriya Shema. We learned from that pasuk that you're not allowed to say Kriya Shema in front of a Jew who's not dressed to certain varying degrees. We saw Maseches Brachos, what if a man's chest is revealed? How does it work in regards to women? Do we say Tevach B'She'erba? This plays out at Shabbos tables all the time when you have company who's not dressed properly. And then the Bir Halacha in Siman Ayin Hein Orach Chaim writes this idea that Atzima Seinayim does not work for histaklos. So if you have someone at your table, we had a guest for Pesach 2 years ago, long time ago, pre-COVID, a year plus, it feels like yesterday. So we had a guest over, a work colleague that I ran into, and she ended up coming for a meal on Pesach. Fine. So she would we told her the approximate attire, just so you're comfortable, just so you know, in our community, typically women wear shirts with sleeves, and they usually but does that, like, how long are the sleeves? Like, I should have been a little bit more mafare, but a 3/4 length sleeves, Anyways, so the din is, if there's a tefach b'isha erva and that person is in front of you and you want to make a bracha, closing your eyes is insufficient in the poskim. Atzimas einayim is not enough. You have to look down, and it can be awkward sometimes when there's people around you. You're in Times Square, you want to make a bracha, there's people around, you got to look down. That's the din. We don't say Hashem's name. Anyways, we know by Kriya Shema that that's true. But here, this Gemara meant and needed to come teach us specifically about a goy. That's what the pasuk meant when it said that Shema cannot be said in front of an akum when they are arum, when they're not dressed. Says the Gemara, "Ma'iri ove kochavin." Afil Yisrael nami, my nafkamina. Everyone agrees that in front of any erva you're not allowed to say Shema. Lomi baya ka'amar. The Gemara is teaching us not only this but even that. Lomi baya Yisrael de aser pasha. We know that it's true that if there's a Yehudi, if there's a Jew who's not dressed properly, you're not allowed to say Shema. Lomi baya Yisrael de aser aval ove kochavim kevan dechsid be asher b'sar chamorim b'saram. How literally do we take the pasuk that their flesh is the flesh of a chamor, ema shapir dami? I might have thought that because their flesh has the din of a chamor, so then maybe it should be permissible to say Shema because it doesn't have a real din of erva. Think about it. Hair has a din of erva, but before they're married, there's no din of erva. It's nothing inherent in the hair. We have iconized body parts, but that doesn't mean that inherently they should be viewed as erva. Maybe by a non-Jewish person when they're not dressed, maybe Shema should be mutter. Says the Gemara, Kamash Malan, Rabbi Yehuda, therefore, use this pasuk to teach us that that's not the case. But maybe we should say, in fact, that it's true that one can recite Shema. What's holding us back? How do we know that this pasuk is enough? This is a strange question. It's one of those questions that's only brought about to give the answer. Because we already learned the pasuk that indicated that by a goy you're not allowed. But a beautiful Mari Makom, Amar Kra, the Ervasa Vihem Lo Ra'u. Who are we talking about here? The famous story of Noach. The Ervasa Vihem Lo Ra'u, and he was not Jewish. Pre-Torah. So therefore, because he was not Jewish, and we called that ervas, we called that erva by him. So therefore, we know that by a goy that they have a din of erva as well. Ask the Gemara, going back to our sugya, but dibur mi asir, are we not allowed to be explicit about what it is that we would like to get done? We said only hirhor, only speaking, leaving the actual nuance of I'm going to hire you after Shabbos. That's only done by hirhor. But hey, I'll see you at 9:00. Yeah, is that good? So that's allowed, but. Says Gemara, really? Why can't I just say it explicitly? They said, you can do math about a fundraiser for a shul, for a base medrash, for whatever, that's mutter. You can decide how much money you're giving to a poor person even though it's on Shabbos. You're allowed to deal with major issues. Doesn't mean literally pikuach nefesh because obviously, that would be mutter. It means serious issues that are taking place that can be dealt with. On Shabbos, technically speaking, if you wanted to have a serious meeting in Shul on Shabbos, that would be permissible. You can go to theaters and you can go to these places like circuses and to basilicas, as the art scroll, that's what the word says, basilica. Basilkaos, lefakech, liske rabin, b'Shabbos, that's all permissible. Not only that, still more. The Tana de Bei Menashe, b'Shadchan al Tinokos, le'aris, you're allowed to set up Shidduchim b'Shabbos, ve'alatinuk l'lamdo sefer, you're allowed to set up a Rabbi for him, l'lamdo umnus, to make sure that he gets someone to teach him an umnus. Amar Kra, why is it that all of those are allowed? Obviously, we know the answer intuitively, but let's see Amar Makom, mimitzochef secha v'daber davar, chafatzecha asurim. Your own personal things, that's not allowed. However, cheftzei shamayim mutarim. That is allowed if you are doing something that is for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We will stop here for the night. Wishing you a beautiful night. We'll pick up tomorrow night, Emir Hashem. Same time, same place. Daf Kuf Nun Amud Beis and Daf Kuf Nun Aleph. Have a beautiful night.
Yeah.